Most of the time, when we see a disaster on the news, we see only destruction. People crying, houses falling, and headlines filled with fear. But have you ever wondered what happens after the cameras leave? What happens when the floodwaters go down and people are left with nothing but courage, hope, and each other? Today, I want to share with you a story that the media doesn't tell. It is not just about Pakistan's floods. It is about the human spirit, about how people who lose everything find a way to rebuild stronger than before. It is about communities turning tragedy into innovation, and about a nation showing the world what resilience really looks like. This is not a sad story, it is an inspiring one. It is not just Pakistan's story, it is a lesson for all of us in every country, in every community. And if you stay with me until the end, you will see how from disaster comes strength, how from loss comes innovation, and how from struggle comes unity. So let's begin this journey together, and I promise by the end of it, you won't just see floods, you will see hope, courage, and a future that rises from the water. When the world looks at Pakistan during floods, the story is often reduced to visuals of broken homes, desperate families, and overflowing rivers. These images are powerful, but they tell only half the truth. The global media tends to focus on the drama of destruction while leaving out the deeper reality, the extraordinary resilience that rises from within the people. Beyond the headlines of disaster lies a human story of courage, adaptation, and unity that rarely makes it to international screens. In every flood-affected village, the first images shown are of devastation. But if you stay a little longer, you will notice something that news cameras often overlook. Neighbors carry each other through the water. Youth form human chains to rescue children, and women transform schools and mosques into relief centers. Farmers, who may have lost their entire season's crop, still share the last remaining bag of grain with others. These acts of solidarity do not fit neatly into the narrative of helpless victims, but they are the foundation of survival. The reality is that resilience is not born out of luxury. It is born out of necessity. Families who have lost everything do not sit in silence waiting for help. They rebuild brick by brick with whatever they can salvage. Temporary shelters become new neighborhoods, and shared kitchens turn strangers into extended families. Such stories reveal a strength of character that cannot be captured in numbers or satellite images. Yet, because they do not offer the same drama as collapsing houses, they remain untold. Another overlooked aspect is the creativity and problem solving that emerges from these crises. People invent makeshift boats from oil drums, they create elevated platforms to save livestock, and they find new ways to store clean drinking water. These solutions may look simple, but they are born from quick thinking and determination. They demonstrate how communities turn tragedy into training for future resilience. When international audiences see only despair, they miss the larger truths that there is as much to admire as there is to mourn. The strength of Pakistan's people is not in avoiding floods, but in refusing to be defeated by them. The media may stop its coverage once the waters recede, but life does not. What remains is not just destruction, it is the collective memory of endurance, the shared will to rise again, and the unspoken pride of surviving against us. When the floods swept across Pakistan, what became immediately clear was that official systems alone could not carry the burden of rescue and relief. Roads were broken, communication lines were cut, and the sheer scale of water left even the most equipped authorities overwhelmed. In this vacuum, it was ordinary people who rose to the challenge. Entire villages, bound not by formal training but by human instinct, became the first line of defense against the rising waters. Strangers helped strangers, and families risked their own safety to protect neighbors. What emerged was a raw demonstration of unity forged in crisis that reflected the very essence of community spirit. In remote areas where rescue teams could not reach for days, it was the youth who organized themselves into volunteer groups. They built rafts from wood, tied ropes between trees, and waded chest deep in water to pull the elderly to safety. Young men and women coordinated food supplies, sometimes walking miles to bring dry rations to stranded families. Without waiting for instructions, they became rescuers, leaders, and coordinators, proving that heroism does not always wear a uniform. The efforts were not isolated gestures, but collective movements repeated across thousands of villages. Women too played an indispensable role in this unity. With homes submerged, they turned schools, mosques, and roadside shelters into hubs of care. They cooked for dozens of displaced families, looked after children who had lost parents, and ensured that cultural traditions of hospitality remained alive even in moments of scarcity. This silent strength held communities together at a time when fear could easily have led to despair. These efforts often remain invisible to outsiders, but within the heart of Pakistan's villages, they are remembered as the very force that kept life moving when everything else stood still. Such unity also dissolved barriers of class, tribe, and region. Landlords worked alongside farm workers to build embankments. City volunteers traveled to rural areas with supplies, and people who had once been divided by social differences stood shoulder to shoulder as equals against the flood. The crisis did not ask for titles or backgrounds. It asked for hands, and hands were extended without hesitation. This is the side of disaster that rarely gets reported, the shared humanity that transforms suffering into solidarity. It is not just the survival, it is the affirmation that in the face of overwhelming loss, people can still come together and create strength that no flood can wash away. When disaster strikes, it often forces people to think differently, and Pakistan's floods have shown this truth time and again. While destruction washes away homes, schools, and farmland, it also compels communities to search for new ways to survive and rebuild. In the heart of flooded regions, where resources are scarce and help is slow to arrive, innovation becomes a natural response. What begins as an act of necessity often evolves into long-term practices that strengthen entire communities. Farmers who once depended only on traditional cropping methods have been experimenting with flood-resistant crops and smarter irrigation systems. They learn from their own struggles and adapt in ways that bring sustainability into agriculture. When fields are submerged, some begin fish farming as an alternative source of income, while others start rooftop vegetable gardens that resist the floodwaters. These changes are not part of large government programs, but arise from the creativity of ordinary people who refuse to surrender to loss. Such adaptive practices demonstrate how innovation can emerge from hardship rather than comfort. In many villages, renewable energy solutions have also surfaced as a direct response to repeated blackouts caused by floods. Young engineers and students have designed affordable solar panels and micro-hydro systems to provide electricity for basic needs. Communities that once relied solely on fragile grids now experiment with cleaner, self-sufficient energy models. This shift not only provides light during dark nights of disaster, but also plants the seeds of long-term resilience, reducing dependence on unstable infrastructure. Technology has also played a quiet but powerful role. With traditional communication lines failing, rural youth have turned to mobile apps and social media to coordinate relief and share real-time updates. Villagers map safe routes through digital tools and organize donations through online platforms. These grassroots uses of technology show that even in the most rural corners, digital literacy is becoming a tool for survival and progress. What outsiders often overlook is that these solutions are not temporary patches. Many of them continue long after the floodwaters receded. Families learn to live with fewer resources, but in more sustainable ways. Communities discover that local innovation, when nurtured, is more reliable than waiting for distant aid. Out of the struggle comes not just survival, but a deeper culture of problem solving, creativity, and resilience that turns every crisis into a classroom for building a stronger future. Pakistan's floods are not only a national tragedy, they are also a reflection of a global imbalance. The country contributes less than 1% to global carbon emissions, yet it is among the top nations suffering from climate disasters. This reality exposes a deep unfairness in how the consequences of climate change are distributed. Wealthier countries, whose industries have driven decades of greenhouse gas emissions, face far fewer immediate consequences, while nations like Pakistan pay the price with lives, homes, and futures washed away. The images of submerged villages are not just about local weather. They are a mirror showing the global community the true cost of inaction. When millions of people are displaced by water, it is not simply a national problem, but a symptom of a worldwide crisis. Rising global temperatures, melting glaciers, and unpredictable monsoons are shaped by patterns of consumption that extend far beyond Pakistan's borders. The responsibility, therefore, cannot be placed solely on the shoulders of one nation. It is a collective burden that calls for international cooperation, fair climate financing, and stronger commitments from those countries most responsible for emissions. Yet, what the world often offers is sympathy instead of structural change, short-term aid instead of long-term investment. This imbalance highlights a crucial truth. Resilience in Pakistan cannot be separated from responsibility in the rest of the world. Communities may show extraordinary courage and resourcefulness, but without global action to slow down climate change, the cycle of destruction will continue. Villages will rebuild, but the next flood will test them again. The future of millions of people is tied to decisions being made in faraway boardrooms, parliaments, and industrial hubs. This makes climate change not a distant debate, but a question of justice and human survival. Europe in particular understands the value of shared responsibility and collective action. It has led conversations on renewable energy, sustainability, and environmental rights. But the challenge is not only to lead at home, it is to ensure that vulnerable nations are not left behind. Pakistan's floods remind the global community that the fight against climate change cannot be selective or regional. It is universal. Every ton of carbon saved, every investment in green infrastructure, and every policy shift matters not just for one nation, but for all. The rising waters in Pakistan are a warning signal to the world. Climate responsibility cannot be delayed, and it cannot be divided. Every time Pakistan faces devastating floods, the immediate image is one of loss, washed away villages, ruined crops, and families forced to leave everything behind. But beneath this pain lies a less visible yet powerful transformation. Each disaster creates a collective memory that pushes communities to prepare differently, to rebuild stronger, and to refuse to remain victims. The suffering does not erase hope. Rather, it plants the determination to rise higher and ensure that the same destruction does not happen again. Out of the wreckage comes a drive to turn weakness into resilience and grief into growth. One of the most visible changes after every flood is the improvement in infrastructure and planning. Roads are rebuilt with stronger foundations. Houses are raised on elevated platforms, and embankments are reinforced with community participation. Villagers who once depended only on tradition now actively contribute ideas on how to reduce future risks. With each cycle, the knowledge of how to face floods becomes part of the collective wisdom, passed down like a survival handbook for the next generation. What begins as a painful lesson eventually evolves into a culture of preparedness. The psychological transformation is equally significant. Families that once felt powerless in the face of disaster gradually develop the mindset of survivors rather than victims. Children who grow up watching their parents rebuild after each flood inherit a spirit of determination. They learn early that challenges can be turned into opportunities if faced with courage and creativity. Such resilience shapes an entire generation that no longer views disaster as an end, but as a test that can be overcome. This determination also gives rise to stronger community bonds. Shared loss fosters shared purpose. Villagers who come together to rebuild homes often end up creating systems for collective farming, food storage, and disaster response. Communities become more organized, with clear roles for leadership and responsibility during crises. What once was a weakness, disunity and lack of preparedness, turns into a strength of collaboration and structure. At the national level, these experiences influence policy and awareness. Pressure from affected communities leads to better disaster management frameworks and new approaches to climate resilience. What appears on the surface as endless suffering is in reality a continuous cycle of adaptation and growth. The pain of loss is undeniable, but it is precisely this pain that fuels the determination to build a stronger, safer, and more confident future. When floods hit Pakistan, the world usually sees only sweeping drone shots of submerged villages, endless stretches of water, and the misery of displaced families. These images, while real, are incomplete. What remains hidden are the personal stories of resilience, courage, and hope that rise quietly in the shadows of disaster. For every collapsed home, there is a family that refuses to surrender. For every lost crop, there is a farmer who replants against all odds. The untold story is not only about destruction, but about the human spirit that insists on survival and dignity even when everything seems lost. Within villages cut off from the rest of the country, communities create small systems of life that rarely reach global news. Children attend makeshift schools in tents, writing on salvaged slates while sitting on the ground. Women stitch clothes from donated fabric, not only for their own families, but also for neighbors who have nothing left. Young people organize games for children to ease their trauma, showing that even in chaos, normalcy can be nurtured. These actions may appear small, yet they carry a power that cannot be captured in numbers or statistics. The media also rarely highlights the vision that arises from these hardships. Survivors do not simply dream of returning to life as it was. They imagine ways to build a future where floods do not control their destiny. Villagers talk about stronger houses, better drainage systems, and safer storage of food. Farmers discuss adopting new techniques that can withstand unpredictable weather. This forward-looking mindset reflects not despair, but determination to transform suffering into a stepping stone toward progress. Perhaps most striking is the pride that emerges in these moments. People who have lost everything still find the strength to extend generosity. Families with barely enough food share with others. Volunteers from unaffected regions arrive and are welcomed like relatives. In these stories, loss does not erase dignity, it amplifies it. They show a Pakistan that is not merely a victim of climate change, but a nation full of individuals who refuse to let tragedy define them. These narratives, though less dramatic than breaking news headlines, carry far greater meaning. They reveal a side of disaster that is inspiring rather than hopeless. And they remind the world that resilience can be as powerful a story as a destruction. The waters may rise, but so does the will of the people to rise above them. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have explored today is not just the story of floods in Pakistan. It is the story of human resilience, of courage born in the face of despair, and of hope that refuses to be drowned. These floods, as destructive as they are, reveal something far greater than loss. They show us unity in crisis, innovation born from necessity, and a collective will that transforms tragedy into strength. They remind us that climate change is not a local issue, but a shared global responsibility, and that every act of preparation, every effort of cooperation, every voice calling for justice matters. The world often sees only disaster, but the untold story is that within every challenge lies the seed of renewal. Pakistan's floods are not just about what is destroyed, they are about what is built after, stronger, smarter, and more determined. This is a message not only for Pakistan, but for all nations, that from the deepest struggles, humanity can emerge with greater wisdom and a clear vision of the future. Thank you for giving your time, your attention, and your hearts to this story. May it inspire you to see beyond the headlines, to recognize resilience where others see only ruin, and to play your part in shaping a more just and sustainable world. I wish you all the very best in your own journeys, and may we continue to stand together in hope, courage, and shared responsibility. Good luck, and thank you.